Devereaux. I am Adult Services Librarian at Rochambeau Library, Providence Community Library. We are really delighted to have Dr. Michael Fine with us this evening. Dr. Fine is what I consider a Renaissance man. He's a writer, community organizer, family physician, and public health official. He's published serious books on health and social and political issues, such as Healthcare Revolt, How to Organize, Build a Healthcare System, and Resuscitate Democracy, all at the same time, as well as a novel, Abundance, a romantic thriller set in Rhode Island and in Liberia, and The Bull and Other Stories, which his first short story collection, which was published in 2020. Rhode Island Stories, which he'll read from tonight, is his most recent book. In view of the recent surge of COVID cases and hospitalizations in Rhode Island, Dr. Fine would like to begin with an urgent update on the situation. And again, please hold your questions until the very end of the program. Dr. Fine?
Thank you, Lee. Thank you for that very kind introduction. And many thanks to the library for giving me this opportunity to be with you tonight. Libraries, to me, are the bulwark of democracy, are the most important institutions we have, and the ability to be with you in the Rochambeau Library, which my mother loved. My parents used to come there all the time, is a great opportunity indeed. I did want to take a second to talk a little bit about COVID because we're in a challenging place. And I think it's important that people begin to understand where we're at, how we got here, where to go, and what we're going to have to do to get out of it. As you may have heard, we are now seeing over 800 new cases a day. We're probably, I didn't see today's final number, but I think we're probably about 350, somewhere between 350 and 400 new cases per 100,000 per week. Our numbers are doubling pretty much every 10 days. We now have, I believe, 177 people in the hospital, up from 100 about 10 days ago. And we're in what one of my epidemiologic colleagues today called, or yesterday called, an epidemic freefall. We are seeing the rapid progression and spread of this disease. And unfortunately, we are going to see that spread. I can't tell how more intense it's going to get, but my guess is it's going to get fairly intense. Remembering that this is the Delta variant, and we have not yet really met the Omicron variant as far as we know yet. Maybe this is a surge caused by Omicron that we just haven't been able to see, but I don't think so. I think this is Delta that was progressively getting out of control really for the last 3 months. And I would expect, unfortunately, that we will see between 60 and 100 preventable deaths in Rhode Island in the month of December, probably the same number or more in January, depending on how high our numbers actually go in terms of new cases. We have learned something critically important really in the last 2 weeks that I don't think any of us knew. And that is that the vaccine is fantastic at preventing hospitalizations and deaths, particularly in people who are under 80. And particularly in people really 50 to 80, who are the group, that's the group who are both susceptible to hospitalization and death, and in whom the vaccine is most effective. But what the vaccine doesn't do, and we've just learned this, it doesn't prevent the transmission of the disease. It doesn't prevent infection. So I was working in Central Falls today, vaccinating people and helping test them. 60% of the positives that we saw were people who were vaccinated. And we would expect, just because of the way the numbers work, that 50% or so of the hospitalizations and deaths will be in the vaccinated group of people. Most of those are going to be people over 80, but there will still be a fair number of vaccinated people who are between 50 and 80 who we see hospitalized and very unfortunately die. We have totally failed to reduce and prevent community transmission. As I said, our numbers are between 350 and 400 new cases per 100,000 per week. And that is because we are a divided people. And we have been unable to agree on the things that we need to do to reduce community transmission, which is one of the two legs we have to walk on if we're going to stop this pandemic. This has become so polarized, and we're fighting with ourselves so much that our political leaders don't have the courage to say what some of us know to be the truth, which is when there is community transmission, everybody's got a mask inside. Just is what it is. Everybody's got a mask inside. Everybody's got to get tested with, everybody who's working in a congregate setting, working with other people, has to get tested twice a week. And then we need to get people who are positive isolated, do the kind of classic public health stuff we were doing in the beginning of the pandemic. And of course, we need to get everybody vaccinated and boosted. And all those things have become so polemical that we are being beaten by a cold virus. This is not Ebola. Ebola kills 50 to 75% of the people who get it. This is going to kill, I'm not sure we have a final number yet, but this looks like it's going to kill something like 0.2.5 or 0.3% of the people who get it. But we're being knocked over by this thing because we can't agree with each other to do the very simple things that we can do that don't hurt, that basically don't cost anything to prevent the transmission of the disease, because we've let it become so politicized. In contradistinction, in Toronto, a neighboring city, a city, in a country very much like ours, a city that is 4 million people and is just as diverse as Rhode Island, only 4 times larger, they are seeing 23 new cases per 100,000 per week, where we are seeing 350 to 400, and that number is exploding. They're all upset because they went from 13 to 23 over a month. They have basically no deaths or almost uncountable deaths, and they're putting 1.7 people in the hospital a week. We're putting a couple of, 100 or two, probably 100, 150 this week, I would guess, in the hospital each week, because we haven't done what is the very simple, basic public health that we need to do to control this cold virus. Now, so that's my urgent update. This is a serious thing. It is now time for people over 80 to stop shopping. It's time for all of us to mask inside. And those of us who are working in congregate settings really should get tested by PCR twice a week. There are a bunch of other things we can do, but we just don't have enough consensus as a community or as a people to do these very basic things. The other thing we probably need to do is back off on large events of a couple of hundred people. And I'm not sure that it's wise for us to be in bars and restaurants right now at our level of transmission. I think we probably need to look at, take out again, unfortunately, all of which is unnecessary, would have been, isn't really necessary, or it's necessary now, but could have been avoided if we had acted together and acted coherently using basic public health sense in August or September. This was all avoidable. And we couldn't avoid it because we just didn't agree with each other enough about doing these basic, simple things. Now, how does that have anything to do with the fiction that I'm writing? What actually has a huge amount to do with it. I really began to think much more seriously about writing fiction in 2001, right after 9/11, when we had that 3 weeks of everybody felt like we were together, we felt like one people, and we were taking care of each other. And that provided for me a lens on our previous, 10 or 15 or 20 years. And I began to understand how divided we were becoming. And I got really worried about what would happen to us as a nation and as a people if we were as divided as we were becoming. And I think we've come to see some of the fruits of that division, not just in COVID, but in a couple of other areas. But you know, that gave me a moment to sort of think back and remember some things about my growing up. I grew up in the 50s and 60s, which makes me really old. But I remember a time when we really did function as one people, even though we were divided, and some of us got really the short end of the stick. But whether we were in a group that got the short end of the stick or not, we did have this sense of us as a single people, sort of with one set of overarching values, and those values were really focused on democracy. You know, you know, every Sunday night, it was easier in some ways because we only had 3 networks. Every Sunday night at 7 o'clock, everybody watched Ed Sullivan, as, you know, sort of weird as he was. But we all had a common experience. We had the common experience of people who had been in the service coming out of the Second World War, you know, which really took people from around the nation, from many different communities, put them in units together. They fought together and died together too often, but they began to have a different vision of this country as one nation. You know, and in that period, we had, you know, this amazing period of almost intellectual life, where you know, in that period, we had a number of writers from many different kinds of writers who were alive at the same time. You know, William Faulkner, Ernest Hemingway, John Dos Passos, John Steinbeck, James Baldwin, Allen Ginsberg, all alive at the same time together. And they were people who all functioned as a kind of moral conscience for the nation. When anything happened in the nation, be it civil rights stuff for the anti-war movement, or you know, the assassinations that happened in the 60s and 70s, the nation turned to those people, and they had the context, they had the wisdom, and they had the imagination to let us process these events. And they were reflecting backward on a tradition of European literature, when people like Charles Dickens and Victor Hugo, Leo Tolstoy, in the United States, not very widely known now, but somebody named Charles Chestnut, who's kind of our Chekhov, Chekhov itself, Balzac, Dostoevsky, de Maupassant, and many others, provided that kind of moral imagination for their culture. Literature was a place, in a way, that we saw the inner lives of each other. And it was a place, a way, and a time where we could see ourselves as one humanity, with one sense of direction and one kind of conscience, as failed as it often was. But we were able to leverage that imagination to make the world a better place. You know, those writers were known throughout their societies, and they were important, and they weren't important because of who they were. They were important because of what they did in terms of create this vision, this doorway into the inner lives of others. And that vision and doorway really let people move forward together. There's been some interesting recent research that explains how this works. Somebody, I'm not even sure where, recently did a study where they read a short story to a bunch of different people, and they recorded their heart rates. And what they found as they were doing it was that the heart rates quickly began to move together. So when one person's heart rate increased, so did everybody else's. That wasn't because they were wired together or talking to each other. That was because what the writer did was create a shared experience, and that shared experience let different individuals kind of move as one body. And that's what I think literature brings to the table, and part of why libraries are so important. Libraries are important because they are shared spaces, and they're non-commercial and so on and so forth, but also because they are the repositories of this literature that let us see ourselves as one people at the end of the day. So I've talked too long in a row, or one right after the next. I thought what I'd do is take a minute to read at least one, and we'll see how it goes, maybe 2 short stories from the new book, and then we can pause for questions. We'll see how much I get through. I think I'm going to make it 1 short story to give us a little more time. The first short story I was going to read is called Nero, and it's sort of more about what's wrong with the world. I think I'd rather read one called The Prisoner of Ideas, which is a story that gives me great hope. Both of them are set within, I'd say, about 2.5 miles of the Rochambeau Library. So there may be things you recognize. The Prisoner of Ideas, I think, says it's in North Providence, but you may see a landmark or two that, if you know a little bit on the other side of 95, that part of Providence, you may recognize exactly where we are. So this is called The Prisoner of Ideas. No man or woman can be trusted, thought Sonia Kino, but this one is certainly something of a distraction. I fall into the same rabbit hole every time. They pique my interest one day. The next thing I know, it's 2 years later, and I hear their voice coming out of my mouth. Their thoughts are in my brain, and suddenly I realize that what I'm saying and thinking has nothing to do with what I actually think or what I actually feel, and then I bolt. There was nothing special about the house on Congress Street, and Sonia didn't give a damn about gentrification. The house was a triple-decker like every other house in Central Falls. Sonia bought it because it was cheap and because the numbers worked. You get 2 tenants, they pay the rent covers the mortgage, and you live for free. Or better than free, to be honest, because you can charge all sorts of expenses to the house and make that income invisible to the taxman, even though it comes in as cash every month. Why would a woman not buy a house? But to Babatudne, Sonia's house represented everything that was right and wrong with America, everything that was right and wrong with democracy, and everything that was right and wrong with Sonia herself, although before Babatudne came into her life, Sonia had never seriously considered that there was anything wrong with her at all. Sonia thought she was done with relationships, just done, once and for all. And so she went back to college to finish her degree. She had 3 excellent children, each more interesting than the next, who were now finally old enough so they didn't need their mother's attention every second. She had her sisters and her brothers, whose difficulties provided plenty of distraction in her life. The office ran like clockwork. There were plenty of people answering the phones, and Sonia had a list of per diems, mostly college kids and Uber drivers, that she'd ring up at the last minute if one of her regulars called in sick. The last 2 men had given her children and were steady enough to do their share when she needed someone to drive a child to school or pick up from soccer, but they had both fallen off the wagon one way or the other, one to another woman, one to beer and other women. But she had learned something from being with each one of them and had no regrets. Her relationship with Sophia had become so complicated that it was too much to think about anymore. So now is my time, Sonia thought. I'll finish college 1 course at a time. Then I'll go to law school at night. The lawyers in my office don't have any better sense than I do. They just got to this country first and they make a whole lot more money than I do for doing a whole lot less work. But then there was Babatudne, who Sonia hadn't counted on meeting. Poor, beautiful Babatudne, the adjunct professor and poet, the man who would be a student for the rest of his life, who was pretty, brilliant, full of soul, and would never earn a living. What did I see in him? Sonia thought. They're building a new train station in Pawtucket, Babatudne said. Gentrification. The rich will be coming from Boston by train. They will buy up all the property. Property values will go through the roof. Taxes will go up. You and your kids, you won't be able to live in Central Falls anymore. Central Falls will be for millennials. They will destroy our communities. Where will our people go? How will our people live? There was something about Babatudne's blue-brown dark skin and beautiful brown eyes that Sonia could not stop thinking about. It made no sense, but oh, how that man had soul. The first time they met for coffee, it was to discuss her paper on Chaucer. Babatudne was earnest and polite. He focused on her usage and on her construction, not on her ideas. Outline, he said. Think out what you want to say first, then say it. Short, direct sentences with active verbs and no adverbs. Don't copy someone else's style. You don't need to sound important. Just say what you think and be yourself. I don't write well in English, Sonia said. I think in English, but with Spanish style. Kind of flowery, a little overblown, like a woman who wears too much makeup. You are hiding, buried under words and sentences, Babatudne said. English thinking is cool, not hot, Sonia said. And Babatudne raised his eyes to meet hers for the first time. Chaucer is quite hot, Babatudne said, but I understand what you mean. Yoruba thinking is also different, complex, textured, elegant, full of hidden meanings, and English thinking has none of that richness. I'm sorry this course is so Eurocentric. You might prefer the Latin and Central Americans. Garcia Marquez, Clarice Lispector, Octavio Paz, Isabel Allende, Roberto Balleno, Laura Esquivel, Neruda, and even Vargas Llosa, that capitalist. And Garcia Lorca. Yes, Garcia Lorca. Read them in Spanish, I think. Except Lispector, who you'll have to read in translation, and it's very difficult, but worth the effort. But read the women first. I don't have time to read, Sonia said, because of the children, my house, and work. I pray I can get through reading the readings and the papers for this course. But my writing and thinking, I have no time for this. It takes so much time. That is why I, as a teacher, have office hours, Babatudne said, to teach, to make it simpler for you to write. Can I send you my papers in draft form, Sonia said. Better yet, send outlines first, Babatudne said, and we will meet once a week. Once a week soon became much more than that. But then there was an unexpected difficulty that came between them. Babatudne came to the house to have dinner one night. Sonia and her kids. Sonia went all out. Ripas, chicken, beef, chicharron, mochila, tortilla, tostones, fried yucca with cheese. Not that she was cooking to impress, of course. She only wanted to show Babatudne that she was good at something, that her clumsy sentence construction and poor word choice didn't represent the full range of her knowledge and abilities. Babatudne didn't eat much, but Sonia's kids loved him anyway. He had a poet's appreciation for childhood, and he became a child again as soon as they sat down to dinner. He popped his cheek in and out when Sonia poured out wine. He made fun of Sonia by speaking first in Pig Latin and then in Middle English. He went from saying isple, esple, ithe, altse to Juan, der Perla with the shul, the sluta, der drach, the merchant, piesa to the ruta, which he made Sonia translate for them. And then He made her say the next 4 lines of the prologue, and then he made Yolanda say the next 2 lines, and Hector say the next 2 lines, and he even got Jasmine, who was only 8, to say a line. Before long, Sonia's kids were listening to the whole prologue to the Canterbury Tales. They loved every word and every note of what sounded like music to them. And Sonia could feel those kids falling in love with Babatudene's soul the way she had. They had fathers who were good men, but Babatudene was just on a different plane of being. Sonia suddenly felt somehow thrilled to be alive. Later, when they were together, when Sonia teased him about not eating much, it came out that Babatudene was a vegetarian and that he couldn't eat much of what she made and served. He had an elegant way of telling her that. He didn't say anything about what he would or wouldn't eat. He just talked about how much he liked the arepa and the yucca, and how much he liked reading Chaucer to her children, and how much he liked watching them eat the rice and beans. She understood. Next time there will be more vegetables, she said. I make mean maduros, she said, and a fantastic lentil soup. So Sonia couldn't believe it when Babatudene told her he wouldn't come back to her house ever again. My children loved you, she said. It was a Friday, and they were in his office at Rick, in the tiny cubicle they gave adjuncts, which was jammed with books and papers, a desk lamp, shelves, and 2 chairs, one on each side of a desk. I loved your children. They have life and energy, and a mother with heart and imagination, Babatudene said. But your house is in the danger zone for gentrification, and I can't go back there. When I was with you, I could hear the cries of the people who will be dispossessed, the people who have come to Central Falls from all over the globe, from Honduras and El Salvador and the Dominican Republic, from Cape Verde and Liberia and Nigeria and Mali, after tremendous suffering, who are about to be forced to flee again, just after they've reconstituted their lives. It is too much pain to bear. The train station isn't built yet, Sonia said. They haven't even broken ground. That is not the point, Babatudene said. The capitalists and the materialists are rising out of the bowels of the earth, coming up from the lower depths, swarming and getting ready to pounce. First, they buy up the old brick mill buildings on Clay, Pine, and Barton Street. Then they buy up the triple deckers and make them over into housing for Brown and RISD students. Our people, who already take 2 buses to go to work, will have to take 3 buses. They will have to move to Johnston, West Warwick, and Danielson, where they are not wanted, where there are no others like them, where no one else wants to live. We must rise up. The time to stop the process is now. The souls of dispossessed children are already calling out. Please tell me exactly how you're not coming to my house is rising up, Sonia said. Do you expect me to sell my house and displace my children today for something that may or may not happen in 5 years? You were saying something else. You were saying my children and I are not good enough for you. I may not write English well, but I understand what you are saying loud and clear. Then Babatudene got on his knees in front of him, his hands locked together, and he bowed his head in prayer. The door of the cubicle was open. Someone might see. I was saying that we will take this on together. I will pray for your forgiveness. To me, ideas have souls. Souls are the congealed pain of our history, the history of the oppressed. And some days I feel that pain in the center of my being. But you are my liberation. In you, I see the beauty of all our people, the story of people who were cast down, but find in themselves the strength to rise up, the seeds that germinate in cool darkness and push their way up through dirt and decay into the light. What can a woman say to a man like that? Babatudene's words made her skin tingle. Sonia leaned over and kissed Babatudene on the forehead. She took his clasped hands in hers, lifted him from his knees, and stood up herself. Then she closed the door. After that, every Friday night, when she didn't have to work in the morning, her sister Claudette, who had 2 little kids of her own, came to stay with Sonia's kids so Sonia could be with Babatudne at his place in North Providence. He lived over a butcher shop next to a lemonade stand in a place that was in the middle of nowhere, a place that would never be gentrified because no one in their right mind would ever want to live there. Still, that place was fine for one night a week, and Babatudne somehow made Sonia's soul glad and let her body be at peace. Sonia took the summer off. There wasn't any rush. The plan had always been to take one course at a time. Her kids needed her attention in the summer. It was going to take her 6 or 7 years to finish her degree anyway. Some days, work just didn't matter that much. It was better to load the kids in the car in the late afternoon, drive to the Peach, to Horseneck or East Matunic, where you could slip through after the traffic had come and gone and park for free. It was the same beach after 6 that it was in the morning when the traffic filled Route 4 and the $15 a car parking lots got jammed with cars. The same lime green grass moving in waves with the wind, the same tawny white sand still warm on your feet from the day's sun, but not too hot to walk on, and the same glorious ocean, which was still ready to snatch you away from yourself, lift you, twirl you around mercilessly, and throw you wherever without restraint. She registered for the fall semester in August. Disappointing as it was, she didn't need another English course for pre-law. Best to find a course that met twice a week, late in the afternoon, but one that wasn't too dry and where she might actually learn something she actually needed to know. POL 201, the development of American democracy. POL 202, American government. Phil 205, introduction to logic. Econ 200, introduction to economics. History 201, US history to 1877. Too many choices. Babatudne said he'd help with her writing, whatever she chose, and he forgave her for her choice, which was Econ 200. But he brought her a new book to read every time they were together and talked about the papers he was grading for English 201, American literature, beginnings to the present. He hated teaching Dreiser and Steinbeck, but he loved Whitman, Emily Dickinson, Richard Wright, William Carlos Williams, Amiri Baccarat, Allen Ginsberg, and Martin Espada. Hope, Babatudne said. America is hope, however irrational, and the inappropriate expectation of justice in a world where no justice has ever existed. Sonia found herself waking at 3 a.m. and reading the books Babatudne brought. I don't have time for this, Sonia thought. I need to be alert on my game all day long. But something about the summer's heat was disquieting. Something woke her and forced her awake. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Something that kept eating at her. Even so, Sonia's brain stayed in gear all day long, even when, in a late afternoon meeting, she felt her eyelids get heavy. I can do this, Sonia told herself. I must resist. And she'd stand and command more attention by standing, even as she brought herself back from the brink. One Monday at the end of summer, when the lights were still hot and the drone of the air conditioners drowned out the rumble and groan of the trucks on Route 95, Sonia awoke in the middle of the night and dressed. There was no light in the sky yet. She checked on the children who were still sleeping. 17 minutes there, she thought, 17 minutes back. I can be back in my house and back in my bed before 6:30. But I must know. She drove to North Providence. There is an unusual peace in the city before dawn in the summer. Nothing moves. Everyone is sleeping. Everything is blue, gray, and brown, as if standing in a fog. No one looks, no one sees, and no one knows. There is enough light to see what you need to see. You can learn what you need to learn before anyone knows you've been there and gone. Babatudne's beat-up old blue Saturn was parked at the curb, sandwiched between other old cars, Fords and old Toyotas, Kias and step vans, the tired cars of the poor, cars that spend every night on the street. The light in Babatudne's kitchen was on. What have I learned? Sonia wondered. Only that his car is here and his kitchen light is on, nothing else. She parked in front of a fire hydrant across the street and sat for a few minutes. Then she drove home. It was raining the next night when Sonia awoke. A wind-driven rain without thunder or lightning that splattered and clicked on the glass window panes. The children were sleeping. She dressed and hurried out. She eased the front door closed as the door nestled and did not slam, and so the lock closed instead of clicked. She guided the screen door back into its frame so it didn't bang. Then she drove to North Providence in the rain. She didn't see much, of course. The wind-blown rain brought darkness, made her headlights murky, and made the tree branches hanging over the road into angry spirits that wanted to smother Sonia, her car, and the road itself. Sonia didn't see Babatudne's car at first. Dread, sadness, despair, and anger, the emotions that had been waking her, grabbed her throat, eyes, kidneys, and the pit of her stomach. But then, as she drove past the house to find a place to turn, she saw the blue Saturn parked half a block away from the butcher shop. When she turned and parked in front of the fire hydrant again, she saw that the light was on again in Babatudne's kitchen, partially obscured by the branches and leaves of a big maple that were swaying with the wind and the rain. Sonia awoke Wednesday, but she stayed home. She paced inside her bedroom for an hour till her feet got cold, so she made herself a cup of coffee. She sat in front of a window at her kitchen table and stared at the pink vinyl siding of the house next door. This is craziness, she told herself. What am I doing? I don't own the man. I'm not sure I even really want him. He wants his space. I want my space. There is nothing to be learned from going over there in the middle of the night. I can't change him. I can barely control myself. But she woke again Thursday night with the same panic, dread, sadness, despair, and anger she'd been waking with for weeks. She drove to North Providence. The kitchen light was on, but there was no car. She drove slowly down the street 2 and 3 times. Then she circled the block once and circled it again. There were no open parking spaces in front of Babatudne's house, but there were plenty of open parking spaces on the street that ran parallel to Babatudne's street. Where was his car? She drove further up the street and circled the blocks on both sides of the street and the block behind Babatudne's block. She parked again in the space in front of the fire hydrant. And then she collapsed. You couldn't tell by looking at Sonia that anything was different, but inside her, everything was different, as if her soul was made of sugar or salt that was pouring away through a funnel, spilling onto the ground until there was nothing left inside. Her breath got short. She sobbed once as she put her head in her hands, but she held on to the world nonetheless. I am stronger than this, she thought. I will not cry. And then she drove home. The Old Blue Saturn was parked in front of the house on Congress Street. Babatudne was asleep inside it, a book on his chest. He jumped when Sonia rapped on the car window. He appeared confused, his eyes unfocused, as if he didn't know where he was, how he had gotten there, or even who Sonia was. He found his glasses, which were sitting on the top of his head, and put them on. Sonia didn't wait for him to roll down the window. She marched around the car and tugged on the handle of the passenger side door, which was locked, 2 or 3 times until Babatudne understood enough about where he was, who she was, and where they were to unlock the door, which she opened, and then she came inside the car. What are you doing here? Sonia said. It is 5 o'clock in the morning. I fell asleep, Babatudne said. That is apparent, Sonia said. You are sleeping in a car in front of my house, on my street, in my city. It is 5 o'clock in the morning. You did not answer my question. Just what are you doing here? Why are you angry? Babatudne said. I just left your house. Your car was not parked in front of your house. You have other interests, it appears, Sonia said. I am parked in front of your house, Babatune said, on your street, in your city, not anywhere else. I saw you across the street from my house in my city every night, parked in front of the fire hydrant when I got up to write. And then you didn't come last night. So I came here to see for myself, to surprise you and perhaps to talk. But then I fell asleep. You refused to come to my house, Sonia said. You have ideas about gentrification and the dispossessed. Those are just ideas, Babatune said, and not particularly good ones after all. So I came here tonight to surprise you. Sonia paused, and suddenly she could see and feel something she hadn't seen or felt before. These were not particularly beautiful words or particularly beautiful ideas, but once again, her skin was tingling. Would you like to come in for coffee? She said. It's almost time for breakfast. What thrills Sonia today is not who lives where. What thrills Sonia most today is knowing that she has someone close who listens. Sometimes she writes papers for class, and Babatune edits those papers. He doesn't give her ideas. He helps her say what she believes instead of hiding it behind words. And sometimes Sonia slips into one of Babatune's classes toward the end of the class period. She doesn't come to protect her investment by walking out with him arm in arm. She comes only to hear what he has to say, to listen to the beauty of his ideas, which are just a little less beautiful than his rich and imaginative soul. Babatune comes with Sonia on Saturdays in the spring. She coaches soccer. He sits in the stands and reads, or sometimes talks to the parents of other players about immigration, gentrification, justice, and democracy. But most other times he keeps his ideas to himself and is pleased how much he is learning about unconditional love. The world now seems full of life and hope despite its many difficulties. Yeah. So, thank you for listening to that. Let us open this up for questions, comments, thoughts, or ideas. Deidre?
Well, that was wonderful, first of all. And I love your writing, all of it.
Thank you.
As I was reading this newest book, I came up with some ideas about what I thought you were trying to say in some of your stories, and was particularly struck by the story. I forget what it's called. It was about the synagogue and all the men who were trying and women who were trying to form the minyan.
Right.
And how hard it was to, in this day and age.
It's called From All Men. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. I say in this day and age to find a minyan, and particularly for that particular synagogue. And so they couldn't do the thing that they most wanted to do, which was to pray and pray particular prayers. In contrast, you had the story that had Jake in it, who was was working for the company, the nonprofit, and
One called Woke.
He was out there trying to organize people to demonstrate. And his idea was you could demonstrate whether you had 5 people or 25 people. And I was sort of contrasting the fact you could demonstrate with almost nobody, but to pray for something worthwhile, you needed 10, and you couldn't do it with less than 10. And I saw that in some of your other stories too, this sort of juxtaposition between different ideas. And it really pleased me how you did that. So thank you.
Thank you for seeing that. I had never seen that particular juxtaposition, though. You know, I fall in love with all these characters. So, you know, I mean, for me, this is really the opportunity to really see the inner lives of all sorts of different people and discover that there's more similarity than difference almost all the time.
I know, and I loved Abundance. I've read it 3 times, so.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Other, anybody else? Going once, going twice?
Yeah, hi. I'll jump in. So, 2 questions. One, this character, Barbara Tudney, is he based on someone you know, or is it just kind of a generally you get an idea for something and you go with it?
The latter.
That's one question.
I think completely the latter. He's completely made up.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes these characters, you know, from one story to another start to have similarities. You know, but even so, you know, I think they're just people. And, you know, I think one of the things that's really exciting to me is to understand that we are not one single identity. Most of us have multiple things going on. You know, we come from multiple places and have multiple connections. And one of the troublesome things about, you know, the contemporary polarization is it seems to want to reduce us to being, you know, sort of just one dimensional. And we're not like that. We're just more complicated than that. And if anything, I think these stories kind of celebrate that and kind of almost wallow in it. It's the piece of people that I love most.
Yeah, I like the way, and it was a previous story about a fiddle violin teacher, and so I love the way that that story, and in this one you had the detail about that field, you know. And I'm thinking, all right, either Dr. Fine was a violin, took violin lessons, or he just did a lot of homework.
Little homework.
Yeah.
You know,
So
but it's fun
my
for
other,
me.
my other question
Sure.
was about the gentrification. So Barbara Tudney is very worried about it, but Sonia's not too much. But what are you thinking about it? I mean, you're putting that in there, so it has some importance in terms of the region and what's going on. And certainly this last 2 years with the pandemic and what it's done to the housing market has been horrendous for everyone that's not wealthy. So, but I wondered about this gentrification theme that Barbara Tudney's riled up about, and are you riled up about it?
Yeah, I'm way riled up about it. And you know, I my professional life started in the housing movement. So not only am I riled up about gentrification, you know, I do a lot of thinking about community and what it's like to hold communities together in a time where the culture seems to be trying to pull them apart. So, you know, I'm kind of with Barbara Tudney on this one, kind of ideologically, but I also recognize the practicalities of Sonia's life. And, you know, I mean, I'll spare you the whole spiel about housing and how in the 2007, 2008 recession, we changed the rules so people can't really own triple deckers anymore the way they used to. There's a whole bunch of discussions that we should be having and really thinking about how to make housing affordable and communities function. But I don't think it's the role of short stories to be, you know, sort of polemical. I think it's the role is to open the people. And so you know, if this starts a discussion about gentrification, I think it's fantastic. But that's not what it was really for.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else? I think we're pretty much out of time. Lee, anything from you? Lee, you're muted again.
Glenn had a question.
Then
Yeah, may I ask you to say a little more about what you were just saying again? I'd like to hear more about what you think is the role of stories and sharing stories in building community.
boy, I think they are the central sort of the real central process of building community. I mean, it's what that study I described before. When you find a story, when you tell a story, it pulls people together. We somehow can get rid of our ideas and start to focus on the humans. And it's that relationship that ends up being so both compelling and important for communities themselves. And that's kind of, there's a hidden ideology in the way I'm writing this stuff. And that is, I'm consciously trying to write stories set in Rhode Island and consciously trying to create a Rhode Island literature. And I'm sure I'm going to miss the mark many times, and we'll leave out too many different communities, but I think this is the way we make ourselves a real place and a real culture. The thing that I love about Rhode Island is that it's 1 degree of separation, and our stories matter to us. And we're not homogenized yet. So, to me, this is the work of building communities is really part and parcel of the work of writing, telling, and listening to stories about community.
I think I agree with all that I hear you saying, and I find it not only likely but also hopeful. But then I'm not sure. The way you started this hour was about the importance of the COVID situation and about how it didn't have to get this bad, and we let it get this bad by something like not letting ourselves agree on the things that needed to be done. I think most of the time, many of us hear what's going on as, yeah, there's a lot of disagreement about it, but one side wants to take care of the problem responsibly and one side doesn't. And I would love to think that sharing more stories and opening up characters, as you said, will have some effect on, I don't know, improving that impasse.
I think telling stories are important, but also listening to other people's stories are important.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that I'm kind of a hard-nosed public health guy, and I am. I kind of, I know the science, I think, and I have a particular perspective, but I also think it's important for me in particular to listen to people who I disagree with because, about this stuff, because the more I listen, the more I find some real, there's something real there. It's not, this, the kind of push away from masks and vaccines and all that stuff isn't really just about masks and vaccines. It's really kind of a comment on a culture that has become isolating and alienating, and it isn't listening to people. It's about, I think people are as ticked off that when they make a phone call to, I don't know, government, a bank, anybody, you don't get a real human being to talk to. And they feel, I think we all feel that, and they're manifesting it in a different way. And that's something that I think is really worth listening to and really worth connecting to, because I think that's a trenchant social comment that we would all benefit from figuring out how to incorporate into what we do when we create policy. It's complicated.
Well, now I'm especially glad I asked, because I think you got right to the heart of the matter. I think your point that sharing stories in the good way means above all listening to other people's stories. I really like that. Thank you. So I'll just say I've already got the book that you read from today, but I'm waiting to finish working my way through this one first. And I'll just mention that the story that really touched me especially was When We Were Dead.
I love that story, so thank you. Just, it was like I said, I fall in love with all these characters. What can I tell you? And that you could read it and appreciate it, I think is fantastic. Thank you.
So I think we are pretty much out of time, but I do want to make a plug for libraries as a gathering place for people of all kinds, from different communities, different ways of life, different ideas and opinions about matters both small and large. And one of the things that we offer as a library is a gathering place for those people, and coming into contact with people who are not like you in the same ways you come into contact with people who are not like you in stories, or in whether they're real stories or made up stories, is part of what enables us to solidify as a community and come together. So I want to encourage everybody to read Michael Fine's book, Rhode Island Stories. It's backward on the screen, but you know what it says. Pick it up at the library, borrow it from us, go to the bookstore and buy it, order it online. And we very much look forward to having Michael Fine with us again, whether it's to read from one of his books, and hopefully in the future to give us more updates on the COVID situation too. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And please do keep your eye on Providence Community Library's Eventbrite page and our website for upcoming programs and events.
Thank you, Lee. Just one quick piece of information. I put out a short story a month through a website that's called michaelfinemd.com. If you're interested in getting the story, go on the website. There's a way to sign up, and we'll port you out a short story. The next one that's coming out actually tomorrow is one about a roofer in Situate. Anyway, thanks. And again, thanks so much to the library for being the library, for being there, and for taking care of my parents when they were alive, and bringing them great joy, and for keeping us all alive and making sure democracy keeps working.
Thank you, Dr. Fine. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.